No, we're not recording now, are we?
Now we are.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. But like I said, I've really had an interesting life. I just never looked back on it until now to see how unusual it was, you know? Like I asked people, where were they when they were 16 years old? Did I tell you this story before?
Maybe. I think that.
Most people at 16 are still struggling to get through high school.
Uh-huh.
I was cutting weed in Kansas
Uh-huh.
and living with a beautiful 22-year-old girl with 2 kids in a motel. And I was working with all these guys in their 20s and 30s, and I was their hero. I mean, who's this 16-year-old kid from Philadelphia who's now in Johnson, Kansas, or Ulysses, Kansas, cutting wheat and living with this beautiful girl in a motel? And that, you know, so I was their hero, and I didn't think anything of it. It was just me, you know. I got that on Timo, and I just brought it in to see what it's like. They're pretty neat. But like I said, I've had a very interesting life and just never really thought about it until I got, as they say, with age comes wisdom. I'm finally wising up enough to realize that my life was kind of different. Even joining the Navy at 17 was like, wow, you know.
17. So a year after hanging out with this lady.
Well, yeah, I went in the Navy at 17. I went in what they call a kiddie cruise. You go in at 17, you're supposed to get out on your 21st birthday.
Uh-huh.
Well, I didn't get out. My 21st birthday would have been January 6th, 1963. I didn't get out till January 15th because I spent 9 days in the brig when I was in there. I got into a little bit of trouble here and there. But the 9 days I made up, they paid me for it. And I was in charge of the receiving center in Philadelphia. So all the recruits coming into the base were saluting me, calling me sir and everything. So it's like the best 9 days of my career, you know. It was really nice. And as I said about a job, you know, a job is when you do something you don't really want to do, but you do it because you need the money. So you have to do it. I had 2 jobs. Before I joined the Navy, I worked at a place, a metal manufacturing place. They manufactured those metal ornamental iron or radiator covers. You know, steam radiator. Used to have steam radiators, and they had them ornamental metal covers that went over the radiators.
Yeah.
Well, I made them, and what I did when they finished making them, I had to clean them with some kind of solvent. It just cleaned all the oil and grease off it. I cleaned them and then air dried them, and then they would paint them. You know, I cleaned them up so they would be ready for painting. So that was a job because I certainly didn't want to do it, but it was close to home and the money was there. And then my best friend Dennis's father was working at the paper mill, which at that time was Container Corporation of America. They were making good money, so he got me a job there, and I was called what they call a flyer. The corrugated paper would come out of the machine, and I had to fly it and throw it in a pile. I had to stack it in a pile, and it wasn't that hard, but that paper was razor sharp, and I would go home at night with 20, 30 cuts on each hand. And you know how paper cuts are. There's thin cuts and they're very painful. I used to go home at night and cry and, you know, put iodine on my hands and lay on the couch and try to get some sleep. And then I went in the Navy. Once I got in the Navy, it was like, and I can remember thinking it's the same thing at working at Yellowstone. You know, my ship is in Northern Europe or in the Mediterranean, and I'm there enjoying myself and thinking, I can't believe that they're paying me to do this. They're taking me all around the world and they're giving me money every 2 weeks. You know what I mean? I had a ball. I just couldn't believe it, you know? Especially North Africa. I think I told you there. I met a girl in North Africa. Oh my God, and they're the Arabian girls. And she fell in love, I fell in love. I was only 17 years old and she wanted to get married. I wonder, what would my life have been like had I married her, you know? Which I obviously didn't, you know? But we won't get into specifics, but there's a good chance I have kids all over the world.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, I've had a very, very interesting life. With age comes wisdom. I just didn't realize it until later how so many things I did were different or unusual from what normal, like I said, 16-year-old kids. I'm a 16-year-old kid from Philadelphia. I met a girl in London who took me to see the Beatles before they were famous. I actually saw the Beatles at that club where they were in, I think it was called The Cell or something like that, before they were famous. And so when I finally saw them years later when the Ed Sullivan Show, it was like, oh, I remember those guys. And it's, but who's going to believe that?
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't really care if they believe it or not. It happened. The girl took me because they were so popular in England that people were coming from all over the country to see them. And then I think they went to Sweden and got famous there. But I mean, I actually saw the Beatles before they were
the Beatles.
before they were, they were called something else too, before they were on the Ed Sullivan Show. So, but if I tell people I personally knew the Beatles because after the show they sat around with the people and just talked to them, they'll say, yeah, sure you did, yeah, sure you did, you know what I mean? That's just like Grace Kelly. I used to ride my bike, we used to go to this park on Henry Avenue and Midvale Avenue, and I don't know if you know it, but Grace Kelly's father was a Philadelphia councilman. His name was John B. Kelly, and they lived in a beautiful house on Henry Avenue right next to this park. Well, this friend of mine, Ronnie Riley, who basically lived in a project near there, we used to ride over to that park on our bicycles, and we were playing in the bicycle, and the next thing you know, he delivered papers there, and he delivered the paper to Grace Kelly's house long before she was a movie star. And one day they invited us in the backyard. They were having iced tea on a hot summer afternoon, and there I am sitting in the backyard with Grace Kelly and her mother, and John B. Kelly, and having iced tea with some woman who's going to be one of the most famous people in the world, who I basically knew personally by sitting there having iced tea with her.
And you knew her before she was Grace Kelly.
Before she was Grace Kelly, yeah. I mean, she was Grace Kelly. That's her real name. Her father was John B. Kelly, who I think was a city councilman. He had something to do with the city. But anyway, we used to sit in the backyard and have iced tea with them and think nothing of it, then get on our bicycles and ride away, And yet I tell people, and I mean, I don't know if you believe me or you don't. It doesn't matter. It happened. It's just one of those things. I just never thought about it being so unusual from what most people go through in their life. I just had so many interesting things that I've happened to experience in my life that it's not until later, like you say, with age comes wisdom, that I'm realizing how different, how unusual some of the things I've done in my life compared to other people were, I have not had a boring life. I had a very interesting life, So.
What about I'm flying by the seat of my pants here. Like I feel like I'm from day one when my dad and son and I met you.
Okay.
My dad nudged me and goes, "This guy's a storyteller." Like,
well,
you tell stories. It's your life.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, it's like I didn't realize until later in life how many interesting things I've done. I just thought they were normal things.
I would wager if I could go back in time 20 years, 30 years, I would say the same thing about you. That you're a great communicator.
Well,
so a 16-year-old that's cutting, hay and stuff, isn't there like you had to have had some level of intelligence to be able to communicate, to be able to navigate, to get in the spaces that you were in, right?
I certainly don't want to seem the proverbial better than thou, and I don't mean this in any way egotistically, but I'm the smartest person I've ever met, and I don't mean that in any way egotistically. It's just that I can't believe some of the things, and like I say, looking back on it, how many things that I've experienced and that I know that other people haven't, and when I tell them about it, I'm sure if not the majority, a lot of them say, "Oh yeah, sure," they don't believe me. I don't care if they believe me or not. I know it's true.
Yeah, I think that that's always a risk with anything, right?
Oh, sure,
when
yeah.
people tell a story, when people retell anything, there's always the chance that someone's full of crap. But,
right.
for
Jamie,
me,
could I have another tea? Thank you.
For me, I'm always just kind of following what I'm interested in,
Mm-hmm.
and your storytelling ability is interesting to me.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate that, but the thing is, I don't even read fiction.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in fiction. I'm not interested in reading somebody else's fantasies. I mean, we all have our own fantasies. If I'm My thoughts was long ago, if I'm going to be a writer, it's going to be facts. Everything I write is going to be true, and you're going to be able to basically double check it, you know. Now, in fact, interestingly, the woman that I had ended up living with in Kansas was from Pleasantville, New Jersey. I met her down on the boards. Which is another extreme story. I went to Wildwood to work for the summer on the boardwalk because my parents, when we were kids, we used to spend a week in Wildwood at this woman's house, and she said she'd give me a room for the summer if I went down there. And I was so close with my parents that they approved me dropping out of school when I was 16 years old, hitchhiking to Wildwood, New Jersey. In fact, my mother gave me a big old hard-sided suitcase that I still have in my bedroom at home that I took with me, and then that ended up going to Kansas and New Mexico and everything, and I brought it back, and I still have it after all these years. And just the fact that my mother and father allowed me to drop out of school. I was in Catholic school. The Catholic school that I was in closed down, and they moved to another school in Center City, Philadelphia, which was probably a good hour's ride. I either had to take the train or I had to take the bus and the trolley car to get to school, when there was a public school very close by that I could get to on my bicycle in 5 minutes. So they let me drop out of Catholic school and go to public school. But when I get into public school, they were years behind what we learned in Catholic school. I mean, I was in 9th grade, and when I dropped out, I actually had to repeat 9th grade in public school. And when I got to public school, I told my parents, I said, this is stuff that we learned 5 or 6 years ago. I said, nothing, I said, I'm smarter than the teacher. And I don't mean that's any way sarcastically, but I just, it was ridiculous for me to be in this class. It was like a 5th grader sitting in kindergarten. So I asked them if I could drop out of school, and both my mother and my father agreed. Can I have that sugar?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Like I said, I was very close to my parents. In fact, my brothers asked me years later to my mother. I remember this. My oldest brother, Jim, who was in the Marines, he said, "How come he calls you Mary?" I called my mother Mary, not all the time, and she just said, "He always called me Mary." And it was like that's how I used to have conversations with my mother.
No, that's all right. It's set design.
I used to have conversations with my mother, and I would talk to her like she was a friend, which she was. I'd say, "Mary, what about this or what about that?" So that's when my brother asked her, he says, he always called me Mary. So it was no big thing. But like I say, I dropped out of school, and who would have known that a month later I'd be living with a 22-year-old woman in Kansas, you know? It was like...
What was her name?
Her name? Can I say her first? Now, I just found out she passed away about 5 years ago because I basically tried to look her up. And, well, let's just say Helen, okay?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Amazing. Who's better than you? Nobody.
You want any ketchup or?
No, I'm good. This is perfect.
Yeah.
Maybe a little mayo.
You'll love those beans. Their beans are delicious if you're a bean person. Like I said, I met these two guys on the boardwalk in Wildwood. You know what I was doing in Wildwood? I got a job on the boardwalk, which I wanted to do, where you get the big mallet and you try to hit the bell to test your strength. Well, I had a job doing that, and I want to tell you right now, they are totally rigged.
They are. Thank you.
Because if I want people to hit the bell, there was just a little screw in the back I could adjust it a little bit, and they would
To
hit
allow it to go all the
and
way
they
up.
would hit the bell, yeah. And then if you didn't, you'd turn it down, you know.
Oh,
Oh, I didn't have control over that. I mean, unless there was a pretty girl or something,
that's
you know
what
what
I
I
was
mean?
saying. Like, what?
Yeah,
At
right.
what point would you?
Yeah, but
make
as
it
far as
happen?
the guy I worked for, he handled that. And here's another interesting thing. At night I think we had four big mouths, and you might not realize what goes on behind the scenes with various things. But each night I had to carry the mallets down the boardwalk about 100 yards, and you know the little kiddie rides where the boats go around in the water.
Yeah.
I had to put them in there. That you used to soak the mallets every night,
So they get heavier. And
so they would be tight. So the metal would be tight because once that wood dries out, the metal rings that holds that mallet head come off. They get loose.
oh, okay.
So by the end of the day, in fact, any time one of them would get loose, I would have to run one down and put it in the water for a couple hours so that it would swell the wood up, you know. I don't recall what they were made from, but it was just one of the many little behind the scene things that you did that you would never know, you know. But anyway, I met these two guys who had gotten kicked out of the Army. They were both dishonorable dischargees from the Army, which means they didn't have this. You know what this is, right? I always wondered what DD stood for, 214. That just means an honorable discharge. But I never knew what DD stood for. DD stands for Department of Defense, or Defense Department, whatever. So the thing is, it's probably one of the best things you can get when you go in the Army is get an honorable discharge, and that helps you. Like it helped me to get on the fire department. It gave me an extra 10 points on my test because I was a veteran, you know, an honorably discharged veteran, as opposed to being an other than honorable. Other than honorable doesn't get you the jobs, you know what I mean? So it's one of the best things I ever did was put 4 years in the Navy and get an honorable discharge. And then I got on the fire department. Like I said, I put years on the fire department, and
What about those two guys you met?
oh, okay. Now, two guys I met. Well, they met this girl Helen, who one guy was going to marry her. So anyway, not only were they both dishonorable dischargees from the Army, neither one of them knew how to drive. Helen had a '57 Nash Rambler. So we're talking. This was probably I went in the Navy in '59. So this was either '58 or early. No, this had to be '58. So anyway, they're going to drive to Maryland to get married. But she was the only driver. Neither one of them knew how to drive. So they asked me if I would drive them to help drive them down to Maryland to get married. So we drove down to Maryland to a justice of the peace. He laughed them out. They showed up to get married with no marriage certificate, no license, nothing, you know, no paperwork or anything. He just laughed them out of there. So then they decided to go to this one guy's house, brother's house in St. Louis, Missouri, or no, it's in St. Louis or was Kansas City? There's two Kansas cities. You're aware of that, right? Kansas City, Missouri. But anyway, we went out there, and the next thing you know, I ended up with this Helen. So.
But you guys didn't get married.
Huh? Oh no, we didn't get married. Yeah, we didn't get married. But her and I, we left that guy in Kansas City, and Al went with us, the one guy, and we ended up in Alamogordo, New Mexico, which was. I actually went back to Alamogordo, New Mexico, years and years later, and it's so completely different than what it was back in 1957. You know, 58. Yeah, it would be 58. And when I went back there recently, well, not recently, probably 10 or 15 years ago on my Harley, I didn't even recognize the place. It was so developed, so big that I couldn't recognize any of the places that we had been back then, you know. But yeah, like I say, I ended up with this Helen cutting wheat in Johnson, Kansas, Ulysses, Kansas. I remember actually the guy I worked for was a guy by the name of Pertle Wilson, and if I'm not mistaken, it was Pertyl, Pertle Wilson, and he had a son named Eddie. Now, like I said, I was 16 or 17 years old. In fact, I was 16 years old, and so was Eddie Wilson. And I used to work in the combine. What they did, they had a combine. The combine would go around cutting the wheat, and then it would come over and it would blow all the wheat into the back of a truck, and then I had to take the truck back to a barn wherever that might be. You know, they would contract out to do fields of wheat for different farmers all around that area, and when the truck had like 5 big compartments in it, and then I would take it back to the barn and actually have to pull inside a barn and dump the wheat, and you'd have to do it. There was like, I'd have to pull up the last gate and then dump it, and then maybe drop it down and pull up the next, because there was like 5 compartments and full of wheat. And oh my God, that, you know what you would get in your mouth? Grasshoppers. There was thousands and thousands of grass. I mean, they were just flying around like, oh, they'd fly right into your mouth and everything. I'll never forget that. But it was, you know, it was hell of an experience. And like I said, I just wonder how many other people have. And I mean really fortunate enough, because I mean I'm really happy that I was able to experience all this stuff, because it gave me an understanding of life in general. And like I said, I just naturally compare myself to what other people have done. And if someone has never been cutting wheat in Kansas, then they don't know anything about that, you know. And I've been there, you know, the old saying, been there, done that, you know. And I just remember that was such an experience, and just experiencing the grasshoppers was something you would never even think about. I mean, somebody living back in Philadelphia or New York City who never been around a place where there's, I'm going to say millions, if not, I mean thousands for sure, but millions of grass. I mean, they were all over. You got to watch having your mouth open, because they would hop right in your mouth. As you're going down the field cutting things, all you see is grasshoppers all over the place, you know. It's just like sunflowers. I don't know if you know sunflowers. Sunflowers follow the sun. In the morning, if you drive up the road, all the sunflowers are facing east. You drive up there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they're facing west. And you tell people this, they can't even comprehend that. But that's what they do. They actually turn and follow the sun around, you know. So, you know, do I believe in God? When you see stuff like that, how can you not believe in God? Who else would have done something like this, you know?
Yeah. It's just an accident.
Yeah, it just happened out of whatever, yeah. But the fact that I was 16 years old and experienced,
I'll take some. Yeah, I'll take some.
Yeah.
Thank you.
the fact that I was experiencing all this stuff when I was 16 years old, that people who were in their, you know, senior citizens have never experienced it, you know, which, and as I say, I don't mean this egotistically at all, is that I've probably experienced more things than just about anyone I've ever met in my life, you know. And not to say that I'm more intelligent than them. I mean, there's a difference between intelligence and experience. And experience is like, say, age brings knowledge, you know what I mean? That's what I have. I have the age. I've been doing it for so long. When I was a kid, just, you know, and I don't mean to go off in tangents.
I like a tangent.
Well, the thing is, I didn't even know my uncles. My mother had 5 brothers. 4 of them were in the army in Germany until I was about 5 years old, so I didn't even know them. My 5th uncle, her oldest uncle John, he was a merchant marine. He's the one that almost died. He was on a ship that got sunk, they think, by a U-boat, and you know, they were in a life raft for quite a while before they were saved. So he wasn't even in the army, so he was, as a merchant marine, they're not actually fighting in the war, but his ship was sunk by, like I say, more than likely a U-boat, and he almost died because of being in the life raft for so long. And I became real close with him. All my other uncles were in either Germany or North Africa, where I was later. And it's just being there, like being in the Mediterranean later, and thinking my uncles were here back fighting a war, you know. And fortunately, we weren't at war when I was in the Navy, you know. because I mean, I would have gladly done it, but thank God we didn't do it, you know. I got out just before, in fact, Vietnam was just starting as I got out of the Navy. Because I remember I was on the seagoing tug out of Philadelphia, and there was 4, maybe 5 wooden minesweepers right next to my pier, in Pier 1 in Philadelphia. And I saw these little guys running around on them, and I was wondering, I'd ask someone, what are they, you know, these little Orlando guys. He said, they're from Vietnam. I had never heard of Vietnam. That's the first time I ever heard of Vietnam. When I asked someone, what are those guys? He said, they're from Vietnam. Here they were taking 1 sailor apiece, were taking these boats back to Vietnam from minesweepers in the rivers of Vietnam. And they obviously went from Philadelphia down through the Panama Canal and totally across the Pacific Ocean to Vietnam. The boats probably would have fit in this restaurant sideways. That's how small they were. And they were wood. So they probably bounced around like, you know why they're wood?
So they can't be detected, or
No, so they're not metallic. The mines
mines go toward metal.
they're
Okay.
magnetic. They're magnetic. If you go near a mine, it goes, the metal ship, it goes towards you.
That's so dirty.
So, well, I understand, but the thing is, minesweepers are made out of wood. So they don't do that, although
Do they sweep with another piece of metal to like?
I don't know exactly what they do, but the thing is they have, obviously their metals, their engines and all are all metal, so I just wonder, you know, but I
I'm sure
assume,
some of them got blown up.
well, oh sure, but I'm sure the fact that they have a wooden hull cuts down their magnetism attraction, let's say, you know? So that's why minesweepers are made. In fact, and I don't know if people know that or not. I didn't know it until I learned that minesweepers are made out of wood. I mean, it's probably something that most people don't even think about, and I never thought about it until I found out that's why they're made out of wood, because mines are magnetic. They get drawn to a metal ship. So I said, well, that makes sense, you know. Well, basically then I got out of the Navy in '63, and I went right on the Philadelphia Fire Department. And that was a big learning experience too. Like I say, my father was a Philadelphia firefighter. He was my hero. I knew when I was a kid I wanted to be a Philadelphia firefighter, which I happen to be wearing this shirt, but you know, I was going to ask you if you wanted me to wear this or a different shirt, which I have. I brought a couple extra shirts with me.
I want you to just be as comfortable as you want to be.
Well, as I say, I just figured that it doesn't matter, you know.
Yeah.
In fact, I stopped at another restaurant on my way down here since I got a very early start, and I had breakfast there. And 2 guys there saw my shirt,
Wow.
and here they're both retired Philadelphia firefighters also. And when the guy told me their names, I can't think of the name, but I worked with the guy of the same name at when I worked Rescue 16, which was at Engine 35, Ladder 25 at Ridge and Midvale in Philadelphia, not far away from Grace Kelly's house. I worked with a guy by that same name, and they told me neither one of them worked at that station, so they weren't sure who that might have been. It wasn't them. I said, well, I remember he came out of fire school right to the station, so he was a recruit. And I had already worked in a few other stations, and then when they put a rescue station, I was working in the busiest rescue squad in the city, Rescue 13, down at 19th and Oxford in Center City, near Center City. And then when the rescue squad came in Ridge and Midvale, I asked for a transfer there because it was close to home, and I got the transfer. And they sent me because I had experience in the rescue squad. That was long before EMTs were invented. We ran by the seat of our pants, you know. And this guy, and I'm trying to think of the name. Here we were talking about an hour ago that I met them. But neither one of them worked at Ladder 35 or Ladder 25, so I don't know who they were, you know, and I didn't recognize either one of them, so they thought maybe they were related to him, but they don't know who it could have been, and I can't remember the name. But like I say, overall, all this stuff, I just never thought about it as it was occurring, as it was happening. But now, later in life, I realize I've done some pretty interesting things, you know. And even on the fire department, at that station, Engine 35, I was separated from my second wife at the time, Joanne. No, I was separated. Oh no, geez, yeah, I guess I was, yeah, because I met my third wife right around that time. But anyway, I was separated from Joanne, and one day I was sitting out in front of the firehouse talking to this girl who lived, the firehouse was located right next to a park, a city park, let's say, baseball field type thing. And there was a girl who lived in an apartment house just at the other end of the park who I had met in the restaurant across the street. In fact, the restaurant was called Babes because I knew the owner and stuff. I used to go in there all the time. And I was talking to her, and the next thing you know, we heard a crash down around the corner. There's a drugstore on the corner called Major Drugs, and I was in the rescue squad. So I ran in and I told the guys, my partner was a guy by the name of Bill Daly. I said, tell Daly to meet me around the corner right across the street. So I ran over. Here there was a little girl, maybe 5 years old, who was sitting on the steps, and a woman come down Midvale Avenue drunk, happened to be a black woman, neither here nor there. She was drunk, she hopped the curb and she crushed that little girl against the building. There was 2 steps where they went to an upstairs apartment. So I ran over, and there was really nothing I could do. The poor little girl's chest would completely open. I could basically see her heart beating, you know. And Bill Daly came around with the squad, and I just picked her up, put her on the ambulance, put her in the back squad, and we took her to Women's Medical Hospital where she died. And it's a shame, and stuff like this makes me cry. The girl I was sitting with, it was her sister. And I never even spoke to her again after that because I didn't know what to say, you know what I'm saying? And I don't remember her name, that was so long ago. But, you know, why, I ask, you know, how come I could be sitting there with this girl who was very, very nice, and I was very much attracted to her, and then all of a sudden her sister gets killed, and I'm the one that handled it, and there was nothing I could do, but I just couldn't face her again. And I never saw her after that. I couldn't even go to the funeral, you know, because it was just so, sorry,
You don't have to apologize.
emotional to me. I couldn't handle the funeral. I just couldn't do it, you know. So that's, you know, things like that, you know, they're a big part of my life, you know. And
And I'm sure there's a lot of. How long were you firefighter?
26 years, Philadelphia.
So there's probably a lot of dark.
Oh God, yeah. 26 years, and I bought my 4 years Navy time back and that gave me almost $3,000 a year more in pension. And I retired when I was 45 because I had a very good business on the side. I was making more money taking pictures at carnivals and fairs around Pennsylvania. I was making twice as much money there on my days off than the fire department was paying me to put my life on the line every night. So it was a simple decision. You know, I said, hey, when I gave the pension come down to 45, just as I got up to 45, I said, see you later. That's ridiculous. Why should I put, because I mean, the next fire might be my last. I might be killed, you know what I mean? So I said goodbye, and my wife was pissed. You know, I said, well, I'm sorry. I still think it was one of the best moves I ever made. I've been retired 38 years, 39 years now. City of Philadelphia has given me over $1 million in pension. Don't ask me where it is, but on paper it's there, you know. Actually, between the city and my Social Security and everything. In fact, when I retired from the Philadelphia Fire Department, you weren't allowed to collect the full amount of Social Security because you had a city pension. Well, they found that law was unconstitutional, so a few years ago they rescinded that, and the next thing you know, my Social Security jumped up like $2,000 a month. So now I'm financially, knock on wood, I'm sitting pretty good, which I never thought I would be. And I certainly didn't do it intentionally, but it worked out nicely, you know. But I'm by no means rich, but there's a lot of people in worse condition than I am financially, you know. In fact, my son just told me he just had to pay like $25,000 in income taxes. I said, well, the only thing that shows is that you're making good money. So hey, don't complain, you know. Yeah, I think I told you my son has his PhD.
Yeah, you told me.
Yeah. He has his PhD in forestry resources science, but I'm the only one that's allowed to call him doctor.
So he knows a lot about trees.
What's that?
He knows a lot about trees.
Oh, he does. Yeah, he really does, and he doesn't work at it. He works with his wife. His wife is she has a copywriting business, and he works with her. He works for her, but obviously they're doing good if their taxes for last year were that big, you know. So I said, well, it's good. At least you're doing that, you know. And he still does his forestry work a few times a year. The University of Maryland calls him, or the company that he went with when he first graduated with that degree hired him, and he worked for them, and now they pay him $50 an hour from the second he walks out the door into the cab. They pay for the cab, they pay for all his expenses, they pay for his airfare, his hotels, all his food. From the moment he leaves the house to the moment he gets back, he gets $1,500 a day. Or I'm sorry, $1,200 a day plus expenses. So that's not bad.
That's nice.
But he doesn't like it. He only does it maybe 6 times a summer, you know. But they might fly him to, let's say, Louisiana, put him up in a Hilton hotel, pay for all his meals, and fly him back, you know. And I'm just so proud of him. I think, and I just wonder what my other son might have done, you know, because he was the smart one. Matthew was the smart one, and I told you about Matt, right? Matt graduated with honors on June 10th, '94, and he drowned on July 10th, '94. Yeah.
It's hard to call it work because I'm just talking to you, and I'm in. Like, without the cameras, I would still be here.
Right. Well, yeah, I understand. What you told me the first time was a big compliment. You told me I sound like the most interesting person you ever met. Well, what more of a compliment can anyone give you? And I have
a confession though.
Do you want it on white?
When I'm with someone, they are the most important person.
Oh, I agree.
I think that's probably how you are too. I think that's why you've been able to be in these different places, because when you're with that girl, you're with that girl.
Oh yeah.
When you're with that buddy, you're with that buddy. And I think in the world that we live in, we're so pulled away from reality and so pulled away from the moment
Right.
that people stop breathing with each other. You know? So like, I'm gonna put this on YouTube, and like I have a channel, and like but it's like I don't expect it to go anywhere.
Well,
You know?
if it does, fine. If not, that's fine too. But
Exactly, because I'm sharing.
I'm going to share something with you that I've noticed lately, and I'm sure you have too. You go into a restaurant. There's 4 people sitting at a table, not like you and I communicating. They're all on their phones. They're all looking. There's 4 here. You know, here's a husband and wife and 2 kids, and they're not together. They're sitting at the table, but they're not together. They're worlds apart because they're all on their iPhone. I mean, I believe I spend too much time on my iPhone.
It's designed to pull you there.
I understand that, and that's all well and good, but there's a time for that. You know, I shouldn't be on my iPhone while I'm talking to you. I mean, you and I are communicating now. That's the way it should be.
I agree.
It's not there anymore. Okay. When I was a kid, when you went out with someone, you communicated with them. You talked to them. You spent time together. I can't. In fact, I hate to say this, but I do it. I walk into a restaurant and I see four people, and they're all sitting there on their iPhones, or maybe even a little computer thing, you know. And I'll walk over and say to them sarcastically, "Are you guys together?" Because they're not. They're sitting there, but they're all off on their own tangents, you know.
I was in Brazil with the love of my life.
Okay.
Her family. She doesn't see her family but once a year. I was so frustrated.
Okay.
Come into the living room. They're all on their phones.
Right.
I'm like, you don't see each other all year long. You
Right.
miss each other. You cry when you leave. And what you're doing now is It's one thing if you guys are like sharing something like, hey,
Yeah.
we're all, hey,
Yeah, right,
check
right.
out the news or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
But it's all separate worlds to where in the human brain. So if I'm going here and I'm looking at anything, and then I'm pulling out, okay, and then I'm talking to you, and then I'm going back in here.
Yeah.
That there's no cohesion.
That's right. You're not really paying attention. You're only paying half attention,
and
let's
then,
say.
and then when you fast forward and you look back on that memory, what's the memory of?
Yeah, yeah, right.
It's
It's not there.
It's so fractured.
Yeah.
And so you were talking earlier about experience. What is that experience? It's a non-experience.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Like I say, our country has, in my expression, has really gone down the tube since I was younger. When I was younger, we communicated. You know, Thanksgiving dinner, we all sat together, relatives come in, we sat at the table talking to each other. They don't do that anymore. People don't do it. They're on their stupid computer or on their iPhones, or even talking on the phone while they're at a table with other people. They're talking to someone else. I said, what's the point of being here with your mother and father and your kids if you're going to do that? And it's a shame because as far as I'm concerned, the country has gone down the tube, at least communication-wise, since I was young.
We're coming up on 45 minutes. I think that's a good cutoff.
Okay, that's fine with me. Yeah.
What's like? Because we can do this again. Like
I have no problem. This is easy. I mean,
this is fun. This is really
Yeah.
fun for me. Is there any? I don't know. Like, pretend this is like a time capsule, and people are going to find this. Is like there anything from Mike Strain, you, that you'd want them to know? Like, if you're never going to be filmed again, no one's ever going to know about you.
Well, I try to say these things in response to your question without being egotistical. Because a lot of people say it, but they really can't mean it because they're not. And what I like to tell people is I'm one of the good guys. And the reason being, I spent my life, and like I said, I don't mean this egotistically, but trying to help others. I was in the Navy. When you're in the armed services, you're there to help your country, to help your fellow citizens. I came out of the Navy, I went right on the fire department. Same thing, I'm fighting fires, I'm putting my life on the line. Any day I go to work, I don't know if I'm going to come home or not. How many other people do that besides, like, say, cops and stuff like that, you know what I'm saying? There's not an awful lot of people that do that. And I say this, I've always thought, especially in my father, who was my hero, that's why I wanted to be a firefighter, because he was one of the good guys. I wanted to be one of the good guys. I was very much one of the good guys to my father because him and I crawled down burning hallways together. When he was dying, he asked for me. I have two older brothers and a younger sister. He didn't ask for them. He was in a nursing home in Cape May, New Jersey, and he was dying, and my mother called and said, he keeps calling for Michael. He called for Michael. And that's going to make me cry too, but I actually got on my Harley and I rode. I was in Potter County when my wife got hold of me. I rode home and I got into my Suburban and I drove my Suburban down there and I got there around 9 o'clock at night. I sat to him when I got in and he heard my voice. He calmed down and he relaxed and I sat there talking to him about 2 o'clock in the morning. And then I went back to my mother's house and then they called around 4:30 and said he passed away. I didn't want to be there when he passed away. I knew he would, but at least I got there. And as soon as I got there, he calmed right down. He was so glad to hear my voice. And I'm proud of the fact that my father and I were so close. You know what I'm saying? So I know he was one of the good guys. I consider myself one of the good guys too. I spent my life trying to help people as did he. And my wife too. My third wife was a CRNA. She was a registered nurse. Her job was to help people. And that's how I tried to live my life as opposed to whatever the opposite might be, a criminal or something, So, hopefully, and like I said, I don't like to get into the religion and God and everything, but hopefully he sees it that way too. So, because I do believe in heaven, But who knows? Is there? I don't know. You know.
Man, this is awesome.
Well, you know, I'm just me. I'm not, you know, nothing special, but that's just the way I feel. You know.
I love it.
Well, good.